Okay, we're live.
Hi everyone.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Kimberly from Jason Legal and Sarah and Amy for having this brief casual sharing session today. Today we're going to talk about marriage matters. So there's a lot of things about marriage that we can talk about. And here we have three experts in this field, Amy as a civil celebrant, and Kimberly and Sarah, who are family lawyers in Hong Kong and France, respectively. So let's get the discussion going about what there is to know about getting married in Hong Kong. Maybe we can start with Amy. You're a civil celebrant in Hong Kong. From your experience conducting weddings in Hong Kong, what is actually the latest regulation, social distancing regulation here with the latest COVID updates and outbreak?
Sure. So right now, the maximum number of people that's allowed to attend weddings is actually 20. So as we know, not a big number. But over the past year, there have been periods of time when the government actually allowed up to 50 people. But right now, at this moment, it's limited to 20. And the thing here I would suggest to couples is that you've got to think about two things. One is when you think about 20, it's not actually the number of people you can invite, it's the total number of people who can actually be at the ceremony. So you have to count, the couple too, the celebrant, obviously, and people who must be there, for example, your photographers or videographer, etc. So you have to count the actual number of people who would need to be present during the ceremony, whether it's 20 or 50 or whatever number that the government might provide. The other thing to note is actually because the regulations can change quite quickly. So over the last year, we've had times when people only had basically around just days notice. If it's from 20 up to 50, that's better. But if it's one of those times when they change from 50 to 20, you will be like, oh, what am I going to do? So I always advise couples to have a plan A and a plan B. Sometimes it's a difficult conversation. You have to tell your guests, look, I'm not sure, but I would like, if you don't mind to block this time for me. And I mean, these days, most people understand the situation, so they're happy to do it, so that if it actually suddenly changes, then you will be able to have the number of people that's allowed under the restrictions. So that's what I would share. And based on what I've seen, I would say more than half of the couples decide to, go ahead with the ceremony. Obviously, they need to downsize, but they would still like to do it. Or some people have picked a date that is auspicious or special to them, so they still want to go ahead. Obviously, there are also couples who postpone their weddings. But we also see some couples who actually never planned to get married in Hong Kong. They had their weddings planned back in their home countries. But given the situation over the past year, they know that they can't really be sure when they can have the wedding that they've originally planned. So some of them decided to actually do it in Hong Kong. So you get all kinds of situations now.
Mm. Yeah, maybe a bit more about what you do as a civil celebrant. And it's a very warm piece of advice that you ask your the couple clients to get prepared with plans A and B. So, what does a civil celebrant do, and how do you help them? Is it just a signing in front of you?
Sure, I'm happy to share that. So obviously the civil celebrant have to make sure, all the legal formalities are complied with, handle all the documents and get the couple legally married. But for me, it's much more than that. It's something that I do to create, a very memorable experience for the couple. And in order to do that, it will be much more than just signing the papers or saying that, one liner that will get them married. So what I offered as a celebrant is actually a very personalized service. So what I do is actually get to spend the time to get to know the couple. I would love to hear about how they met, what are the special moments during their relationship, and what are the things we can share during the ceremony with the guests before we move on to the legal formalities. So that, for me, it's always a very enjoyable experience. For the couple, they also like the fact that, the ceremony is not just another cookie cutter ceremony, same as every other one that they've been to. And the guests will get to know a bit more about them as well, because sometimes you have people who know the bride but not the groom, or vice versa. So it's actually something that people really like. And I also offer to help them personalize their vows as well, give them some guidance on that. And by doing that, I think it would create a memorable experience both for the couple and also for everyone who's attending the wedding. And given how international Hong Kong is, I also offer to do my ceremonies in different languages. So it could be Cantonese and English, or English and Mandarin, or even sometimes we do all three as well. So we usually pick a main language, and then we see which other parts we want to also speak in the other one or two languages, in order to make sure everyone can, follow the flow of the ceremony and enjoy it.
That sounds wonderful. And how about maybe hear from Sarah? Is there a similar role in France, or for international couples, for example, who are from Hong Kong and France, or who have lived abroad? How do people get married in France mostly?
Well, in France, it's much less romantic. That's why I think a lot of people, if they're able to get their families to Hong Kong, prefer to have a ceremony in Hong Kong, because in France, you have to get married before the law in a town hall. That's the first, you can't get married in a church unless you've been already married legally. So usually in France, you will have a formal, very cold ceremony in a town hall, and then you will have a few days later a wedding in either in a church or in any in a synagogue, or whatever religion you are, for instance. Otherwise, there's no other way. You have to get married at the town hall, and then that's when you're legally married. So we don't have civil celebrants. It's very difficult to personalize a ceremony at the town hall. This can only be done with, your if you get married elsewhere afterwards. But the actual legal marriage is very formal. If you're lucky and you live in a small village where the mayor, or somebody from the town hall, that will be a more personalized ceremony, of course. But otherwise, like I did it in Paris, it was, you had a time slot at 9:15. If you missed it, that was it. So that's why I think a lot of French people living in Hong Kong dream about having this wedding on the beach, for instance. Lantau, I've heard, I've never been invited to one though. But I think it's really for us, because it's legal in Hong Kong, they can do it because they're living in Hong Kong. It doesn't, so they have the choice between having this personalized ceremony with a civil celebrant in Hong Kong, or a marriage in town hall in France, where they don't actually live anymore anyway. I think most of them prefer to do a marriage like you're describing today, Amy.
Yeah, I have heard also of friends who have to very strictly follow the time slot in the town hall, I mean in Hong Kong, or the registry, follow the strict signing. It's a very small space. You can't have a lot of personalization or decoration. So a service like what Amy does, maybe you could be creative about it. You can go to a place that you like, or that is memorable to the relationship, and have this special big day. So I'll throw it to both of you to share if you have encountered any creative ideas to hold a wedding these days, like despite the COVID social distancing constraints.
Sure. I'm happy to start first. Over the past year, I think we've seen many super creative ideas because of the restrictions. So we've had quite a lot of couples who decided to do it at home, for example. If, say, some of them are lucky to have a backyard or a rooftop that's really nice. As you can understand, most people are now opting for outdoor ceremonies, better air circulation and all that. We've had people do it by the beach. It's funny that Sarah Jane mentioned that just now, I think yesterday, in fact, for a French groom and a Hong Kong bride, I was on a speedboat to get to a very remote part of Sai Kung, and we just do it, surrounded by nature, by the water, and it was really nice. The only thing is no cell phone reception. So that's the only thing, but that's probably better. You can enjoy the ceremony more. But I would say the most memorable one especially over the past year, was the one that I did last month. We actually hiked all the way up to Sunset Peak on Lantau Island. I was carrying my documents in a backpack. We hiked up for 30 minutes. Everyone got changed when we got to where we were supposed to have the ceremony. And it was just a very memorable experience for this couple who's supposed to get married in New Zealand, actually. So they wanted something as close as possible to what they originally intended, and it was beautiful. It was a very small ceremony, but it was everything that they wanted and more. So I was always inspired by these new ideas that I see. And another thing I guess I wanted to mention earlier was that one of the, I would say, unique features of what I offered, apart from the personalization, is I also offer to donate a part of my fees in the name of the couple to a charity that they support. For me, I mean, doing this role as a celebrant is a very happy job, but I also wanted to make it happier for the couple and for myself. And by donating a part of my fees, I think we're adding an extra level of meaning to the marriage celebration. And it's also something that the couples really like. And in this year, when charities are very hard to, it's very hard for them to get donations because they can't do their big annual fundraising events, etc. They also appreciate, every little donation that they can receive from anyone.
You sound like a good sport as a civil celebrant, hiking up mountains and boats.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun.
How about Sarah?
Well, I've never had this experience to see how French people get married in Hong Kong, but I have noticed in the past year that a lot of people who have postponed their wedding twice, or even more, have decided to go along with it because they can't go back to France. And I think a lot feel, this desire to do a special wedding that like you're celebrating, Amy, but never entertained the idea, because for them the most important was to go back to France and have the legal ceremony in France. But with the situation, they're just saying, so why not? Maybe it's the case of your couple yesterday, because usually I know in mixed couples, they love the idea of getting married in France, whereas French people, they love the idea of getting married in, on the beach, or, this idea of trekking up a mountain. So I feel that you might have a lot of work more than usual, because they can maybe fulfill this dream of getting married for a French person, getting married in a really, really different place and have this amazing experience, and maybe just get over the fact that they can't actually be in France or in another country. I guess it applies to a lot of people, by doing this really amazing wedding, just the two of us with their witnesses, the two of them with their witnesses. And this doesn't mean that they can't do like they usually do in France, is have this legal wedding in Hong Kong and then go back when COVID permits, when the pandemic ends, go back to France and have this more traditional, with lots of heavy food, wedding in France. So I think this is, to make something bad a good thing, is that at least for wedding, it gives another opportunity to people to get over the fact that they can't be with their families to get married. But at some point, you know, when you've been pushing back, at some point you need to get married. You know, you can't, you can't push. And it gives hope that once it's done, they have to go back to France to do this other wedding at the same time. So that's what I think. I feel that I get more and more questions about people saying we need to get married in Hong Kong. That's what Kimberly's going to talk about afterwards. What do we need to do? Because we were supposed to get married in France. So what do we need to do? Is it possible to get married in Hong Kong? So I feel there's much more weddings getting, you know, done in Hong Kong this year.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing is, if they really want to involve their families in one way or another, is exactly what we're doing now. They do it on Zoom as well. And whoever can join, you know, if the time zones work, they can join live, and they can also have it recorded so that, you know, their family can enjoy it afterwards. So in some ways, they might be even be able to involve more people than they were originally thinking about, because you can have, you know, almost as many as you want, subject to whatever Zoom plans you have, I guess, to be involved in the wedding. So that's also, you know, there are ways to involve their families and friends who are not physically in Hong Kong as well.
Great. And maybe we can turn back a bit and let's discuss how you as family lawyers and the civil celebrant prepare the couple for the wedding and as well as the marriage, of course, afterwards. So Amy, you just mentioned you will help them on their vows. So maybe you can elaborate a bit more how you suggest or advise them to put in their vows, or how to make it more memorable and meaningful.
Sure. So as I mentioned, you know, legally, there's only one sentence that they have to say, that the standard wording to get legally married. But what makes the ceremony special and unique and memorable is always the vows. And it's also something that it's not just important to the couple, but the guests also find that part to be the most memorable. So what I do is, I know sometimes for couples, you know, they have never done it before, they have no idea what they should include. I do have some samples that I would sometimes share with them, but I always tell them it's just to inspire them. It's for reference. They don't need to copy and paste it. If there are things that they like or they want to express it in their own words, that's the best. The most important thing is something that comes really from the bottom of your heart, what you really want to promise to the other person. And if possible, I always advise them to be more specific rather than general. You can make it funny, you make it lighthearted, whichever way you want, whichever way that reflects your personality, your style. And there are no rules for that. You can say whatever comes from your heart. I usually also suggest that they don't show it to each other beforehand. So that at the wedding, it can be a surprise, and it makes it more touching. That's where all the happy tears will come. And what I do is they can send it to me privately if they want me to help them take a look. And in terms of content, because there's no right or wrong, but what I offer is I can say, for example, the groom sends me something that's 1 minute long, and then the bride sends me something that's 5 minutes long, then I can say, oh, hi guys, would you like to add more, or would you like to trim yours a little bit? So it's not a huge difference, but if they want to do it that way, that's perfectly fine too. So that's how I try to, you know, help them to create something that's really that really reflects them, and something that they will find memorable in the years to come as well.
I think maybe, Amy, people would also be interested in the requirements, like who can get married in Hong Kong.
Actually, pretty much anyone. You don't have to be a resident or even permanent resident. You don't have to. I have married people who just here on a tourist visa even. Yes, but most if you're both permanent residents, so that's the easiest in terms of, you know, documents we need to submit. if you're a resident but not permanent, and but you have a job here, for example, then the government would need to see your work visas and things like that. But I would say Hong Kong, it's probably one of the easiest places around the world, because I know in other countries, you need to file a lot of stuff, give them your birth certificate and all that. But in Hong Kong, it's pretty straightforward. So that's why it's also quite a popular place for people to get married, even if they might not be originally from here, and some even travel to come here.
Less easy to get divorced.
That you can share with us.
If I can add, for the from a foreigner's point of view, advising a lot of French people getting married in Hong Kong, although the marriage is legal in France, if you get married here, you need to do a certain number of you need to go through a process with your French consulate. For instance, I guess it's the same for other countries from the EU, for instance, but you need to, when you register with you, for instance, to get married in Hong Kong, you need to contact at the same time the French embassy and give roughly the same documents, so that it can be registered on the French registers following the wedding. And if you do it, you don't have, there's no legal obligation to do it at the same time, but it makes things much easier afterwards if you've done it at the same time as your wedding registration in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm just thinking in the vows, or maybe also earlier on preparing for this wedding, they should have gone through a lot of discussions and thinking about how the marriage would work. And I know, Kimberly, you're a big fan of the philosophy that the couple is not just getting married for the wedding, but it's also to nurture the relationship that lasts and that is long lasting and loving. So would you like to elaborate more about how you believe couples can talk and get it work?
I personally would hope that before somebody gets married, that they would have some of the serious discussions about life that can be uncomfortable discussions. So, what is your philosophy about living? What is your philosophy about spending money? What do you think about children? Are we going to have children? If we can't have children, would you consider adopting a child? Many years ago, I had a friend who was unable to have children, and she found out after being married for many years that her husband was really opposed to adoption, particularly international adoption, on very sincere grounds. He was concerned about, people genuinely giving up their rights to the child, and what would that mean for them. I mean, there was very heartfelt beliefs. He wasn't just being a stick in the mud. But those kind of conversations should take place before you agree to, hitch your wagon to each other's stars, so to speak. So I think that it's smart to have those conversations. The difficulty is that the dating is so much fun, and the getting ready for the marriage is so much fun, and what flowers should we pick, and should she be the flower girl, and should he be the ring bearer? At least that's the conversations in the States that you would be having. But you really are joining your life with a person. And it's these kind of issues. It's spending money, how we're going to raise children, what are the major decisions we're going to make in life. For example, and I'm not advocating one thing or another, but what if you and your intended are different religions? And what if those religious beliefs are very important to each of you individually? Well, you could probably make that work fairly well. You go to wherever you go on Sunday, and I'll go wherever I go on Saturday, or whatever the case may be. But then you have a child, and the question becomes, what religion is the child going to be? And many, so if it's important to you, you've got to have that conversation ahead of time, and be willing to live with whatever agreement that you make, because you may say in early on, oh, if we have children, it's fine, we'll raise them as your religion. And then, as time goes on, things like family and religious belief can become much more important to a person. I think that it's more likely to become more important than less important, although both both things can happen. And so, then if, 5 years in, 6 years in, it's time to put little Johnny in school and you're hoping to put him into your religious private school and your spouse says, no way, I want him to go to public school. So it's important to have these conversations. And I think that the reason people avoid the conversations is everything's so nice and so beautiful and so wonderful. Why spoil it with a conversation about what's your philosophy of saving or spending money and finding out the answer to that question, which you may not like to hear. So I guess that's the long version of my philosophy.
But that's lovely, and it's also very essential as well. So maybe Sarah or Kimberly, maybe you could supplement a bit more about how people will usually do it in a maybe legal instruments or some kind of documents that could help them formalize what they agreed in their matrimonial agreements.
I think Kimberly should start because it's
okay. So one of the things that you can do is have a prenuptial agreement drafted. And that would lay out what your existing assets are, what your incomes are, and how you want to treat assets going into the marriage. For example, if you have a property that you purchased with your hard-earned money as a single person, and you've got this house in XYZ place, you can protect that asset. You can, what we call, ring fence it. This is a premarital asset, and in the event of divorce, that asset stays with me. You can do that with a lot of things, with a bank account, with jewelry, with other commodities. I will say, though, in Hong Kong, there are ways of getting out of a prenuptial agreement. So there can be challenges to them. It's not a document that is, rock solid. If it's written in the Hong Kong prenuptial agreement, there's zero way of getting out of it. For example, let's say you do have this nice property that's held and it's a separate asset. So in the event of divorce, the house will come back to me. Well, if your finances haven't gone as well as you think, and there's money that needs to be spent for the children, or if your partner, for example, is facing some major health crises at the time of divorce, that asset could be at risk. Another way it could be at risk is if it wasn't disclosed, right? So it's not even on the list of assets, but you decided not to disclose it when you did the prenuptial agreement. Well, then it certainly could be at risk because you have not made a full and frank disclosure about your assets. If somebody is under pressure before the marriage, it's 10 minutes before the bride's going to walk down the aisle and the best man walks in and says, sign this or the marriage is off, you could probably challenge the prenuptial agreement for those reasons. So prenuptial agreements are very good tools for demonstrating, in Hong Kong at least, for demonstrating your intent on how you want assets to be used. But it's not going to provide you certainty like in some jurisdictions with respect to those assets. But I think that talking about a prenuptial agreement starts you having that conversation about money and savings and goals and how you're going to spend money and how you're going to save and what you're going to do as a couple and what your goals are as a couple. Sometimes I think young couples think, well, I don't really have anything, right? I mean, when we see a young couple coming in, it's usually because there's some assets out there that someone in the background is saying, you're not getting married until you've got a prenup. But, with a lot of young people, I think they think, well, I don't really have anything, so it doesn't really matter. And I can understand that, and it's a cost. But at least if you think about that document, if you have that conversation, it can spark those important conversations. And it's not to say that if your husband's a spender and if the intended husband is a spender and the intended wife is a saver, that you can't work it out. You certainly can sit down and say, okay, this is where we differ. How can we overcome that difference? And it's that conversation that I think is the future marriage saver, because too often things break down when there's not a strong foundation between people, and suddenly these kind of small things become massive cracks in your foundation.
How about Sarah for the French side, or is there a similar kind of agreement or arrangement as in Hong Kong?
In France, it's much more automatic in the sense that it's I'm not going to get into the detail of it, but basically in France, whether the idea is to know how during a marriage the assets are divided, so that if something happens, you know what belongs to whom, basically. So it's quite automatic to sign a marital contract in that sense. So either you do it or you don't. But even if you don't, there's a de facto we have marital regimes. That's what they call that will apply. So in France, there's I would say that speaking more generally about international couples, the idea it's really important to get into some kind of agreement and to talk about it at the same time as you go and see your marriage celebrant, because it's something that you really have to talk about a few months ahead, like Kimberly said, because it enables you to really discuss things that you wouldn't otherwise do. And once it's done, you don't really have to think about it, and you can concentrate on the more happier things, like, you know, the flowers, as Kimberly was saying. But it's really important to do it. That would, or at least get some advice, because when you're from two different jurisdictions and you get married in Hong Kong, which is a third one, even though you don't know what your future plans are, it's always easier to know where you stand. It doesn't mean that, you know, often people think, oh, a prenup means divorce. No, I think that most of the time, because it gets you speaking, it's you'll never have to use that that marital contract or prenup. That's my point of view. So I would recommend for any international couple, at least, to get some information from lawyers from your own country and from lawyers in Hong Kong, just to have information. And then you know that whether or not to get into that contract. If you're French, definitely. I can assure you that you need to have some kind of agreement. But as Kimberly can explain, there's also a possibility to do a postnup after you get married. So, because sometimes people think about it too late, and that's one of the reasons we're having this webinar now before the wedding season, to get you about all the things you need to think about. If you're pressed with time, sometimes it may be better to do it afterwards. I don't know if you want to.
It's true. And what they like in Hong Kong, what we like is, at least in order to avoid this risk of there'll be a claim that there was duress involved, is for people to come to us a month before the wedding. But a lot of times, I'm sorry, to have things finalized a month before the wedding. But often they're coming to us just a month before the wedding, which is really tight timing. I mean, it can be done, but it's better if you come earlier. And as Sarah Jane suggested, you know, let's say you go down the road, you know, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe somebody is inheriting property, or maybe somebody is receiving shares in a family company. And we've seen situations where folks come in and say, I need to have this protected in order to get this particular asset. And people can do what's called a postnuptial agreement. And in some ways, that's a stronger instrument, because there's not that pressure of having the wedding hanging out, you know, out there in the future, and people feeling like, if I don't agree to something, then what's going to happen? So, and you can even have a prenuptial agreement, and then 10 years later, you can pull it out of the drawer and modify it and make a postnuptial agreement. So these are certainly options that you have.
Yeah, I really agree that couples should incorporate this as part of their wedding planning. And like both of you said, it's not a must that they end up having the agreement, but going through that process of discussing, being transparent with each other, in the end, it's going to helped their marriage a lot, actually. And I've also seen couples, exactly as Kimberly said, a month before, while they're, very happily sorting out the flowers, we've submitted the application to the government, waiting for approval, everything is good. And then suddenly they're like, oh, we haven't thought about it, but now my fiance just brought it up. And they are international couples, so we have to involve lawyers from different countries. Luckily, they managed to get it done, and it was important that they don't postpone the wedding in that case, because it was a very auspicious day for the bride's side. So they really wanted to proceed on that day, and obviously they've paid the venue and all that, so they don't want to have to change. And this is pre-COVID as well. So I would highly recommend couples, while they're planning the wedding, to really add this item onto their checklist. In the end, if they decide to go ahead and sign one, great. If not, at least they're making an informed decision. They've looked through all the issues and made the decision of whether to go ahead with the prenup or not.
Absolutely. And of course, there's other things that people can think about once they're married, wills, and once they have children, thinking about guardianship arrangements. But I don't want to spoil the lovely, happy atmosphere that Amy has brought to us today.
Oh, and I know Amy also can help with couples who are reviewing the marriage after the big day. You have vows on the big day, but there are also things that you can help them follow up through and refresh their marriage afterwards. Can you share more?
Sure. So actually, I would say outside of Hong Kong is quite popular for people to do vow renewals on some special anniversary. It could be 10th year anniversary or even 5th year anniversary, and it's a good time for them to kind of look back, right? They've said these vows before, but obviously they've both grown, their lives have changed. They might have gone from being just 2 people to having a few children. So it's really a nice time to, apart from celebrating by, having a nice bottle of champagne, to look back and say, why did we decide to be with each other? Are we still promising each other the things that we promised? Are there additional things we want to promise each other? So that's actually quite a nice kind of anniversary celebration. And what I've been thinking about recently, and I'm going to offer it to clients as well, is vow renewal in the context of COVID, actually, because a lot of people have the small and intimate ceremony maybe last year. And then, maybe in the coming year, they're going to have a big anniversary party. And that could also be a special time for them to look back, especially with everything that's been happening this past year, whether they want to renew the exact same vows they have exchanged, or they have something additional to add. And it's also a time, when they're able to have a big celebration for all their friends and family to be able to experience that together with them as well. So it's something that couples can consider if they already had a small ceremony or they're about to have a small ceremony. When they plan the bigger celebration, is something that they can keep in mind.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, very, very warming as well.
Yeah,
as an anniversary gift.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I was also suggesting to people is that it can be a gift to your parents. It could be the 50th wedding anniversary, and the way they did weddings before could have been very different from how we do it now. Or maybe they didn't have a chance to have the kind of wedding that they wanted, but having been together for so many years, it's also a nice opportunity for them to celebrate their union again.
That's a great idea. I love it.
Yeah, maybe we can share a bit what you have in mind about any important factors or key considerations to maintain a healthy, long-lasting marriage. Maybe start with Kimberly.
Oh my gosh! Well,
I know you have a lot of ideas.
I have many ideas. Certainly, good communication. Talking about expectations, bringing your best self to the marriage. Which is it's a trite thing to say in some ways, but I think it's really true. You know, considering your partner's needs, considering your own needs so that you can be best for your partner and for your relationship. But I'm a huge fan of just the communication side of things, you know, get talking about things, talk it out, work it out. Don't let things fester. Try not to go to bed angry. Those kind of the traditional pieces of advice, which I think are absolutely worthwhile and should be practiced. How about you, Sarah Jane?
I think that everything you've said is just essential. Another important thing is do not forget yourself. I guess be true to yourself, whatever happens. But the communication is key. Basically, if we all go, it all goes down to, okay, you fall in love. It's great, but when deciding to get married, you need to make sure that you have the same. You want to go through the same journey to go. You know, like we were saying, you want children. Bearing in mind that you can change your mind along the way. So anyway, even if you have the same journey at the beginning, and that's what you see with very young couples, because they haven't finished growing and they'll continue growing and they might not be the same afterwards. That's a reason why divorce usually happens. But it's not because you're not growing the same way that you can't stay together, because if you've been different from the offset, and you still be different afterwards. It's just that you've agreed, like, I can't remember who was saying, as long as you know from the beginning and you agree to it, that they should be, that's the secret, communication and be true to oneself. That's what I believe.
Yeah, I fully agree. Transparency, communication, that's key. When you're planning the wedding, when you're getting married, and throughout your marriage, that's really important. And I think also for couples, with everything that's happening, all the restrictions, some of them, they basically went through an emotional roller coaster. Oh my goodness, I have to postpone, I have to change all these things. It's not the wedding that I've originally planned. But at the same time, it's very important to take a step back and think about how lucky you are to have that other person with you who, still really wants to marry you and willing to go through all these changes together. And I look back at, the weddings over the past year. A lot of people, they really find themselves very lucky to have that person to go through all these things with them, because it's not just all the changes that come with wedding, with jobs, with, your daily life, everything. But to take that step back to think about how lucky you are to have that other person. And in some ways, these smaller or different ways to celebrate these intimate weddings, in the end, it ends up being less stressful, because the planning part, all the changes might be stressful, but in the end, you don't have to worry about, my 200 or 500 guests. You'll have a small number of people who are closest to you, and you can really enjoy the day more. I've heard from so many couples, they're like, wow, I didn't expect it to be such a lovely, memorable experience, because I can actually fully enjoy and remember every single moment of my wedding. So I guess that's one of the silver linings, actually.
Yeah, I really love what you mentioned about being more intimate with a smaller group, because for Hong Kong weddings, for locals, we always feel like people, when they're invited, they're obliged to go, but they may not be very close to the other groom, other the bride. So yeah, having this restriction may also help us also like get together and really know about each other and celebrate this great moment with the closest ones. And it's really beautiful that you put it. And we have actually one question from the floor about wedding over Zoom. Well, of course, we cannot speak for other countries or places, but as far as Hong Kong is concerned, can people get married virtually over Zoom? Can people have you vowing them in, or witnessing their marriage?
Yeah, unfortunately in Hong Kong we can't. I know in some countries that's allowed. So in Hong Kong, the minimum number of people we need, including myself, is actually 5. So it's the celebrant, the couple, so that's 2, and they need 2 witnesses. So it could be anyone. Most people pick their parents, for example, but if for some international couples, their family members are not in Hong Kong, you can, ask a friend, anyone who's aged 18 or above, whom you're sure can attend your wedding ceremony, can be a witness. So we'll need at least 5 people in person, and they will need to sign in my presence. So we will have to do it physically, but everyone else can join over Zoom. So that's the situation in Hong Kong.
Great. Thank you for shedding light on this.
I have one question with regards to witnesses. Do you have to register them in advance, or do they just come on the day and you just check their IDs?
So for witnesses, because I would need to put their full legal names on the marriage certificate, so I would need to know in advance. And then on the day, so usually what I ask is for the couple to, provide me best with their ID or passport copy, so I can make sure the name is totally correct. And then when I meet them, then I can make sure they are who they are.
But at the last minute, of course, if somebody can't come, you can switch as long as the person has their ID with them.
It will be tricky because then we'll have to prepare another certificate again. So you need access to a printer and all that. So hopefully that won't happen. But, if it does now, for example, if you do it at a hotel, even at home, you can get access to that. I do pack a spare set just in case. But once they have signed, there's no way we can, print another one and do it again. Only manual corrections are allowed. So that's why I always check the documents first, and I will get the couple to check, and they need to sign in an acknowledgement to confirm that they've checked, and that goes to the government to make sure it's correct. But hopefully there aren't any last minute changes, but like you said, you never know these days. So I do pack an extra set just in case.
Because basically they can't leave the wedding ceremony without this certificate, or could you provide it after? No, because they need to sign it.
Yeah, so they will need to sign during the ceremony in my presence, and then I need to sign as well. And we're actually signing 2 sets, so there's an original and a duplicate. They are in different colors, but the contents are the same. And right after the ceremony, I will hand over the original to the couple. That's for them to keep. That's the one and only original. And then the duplicate, I'll be filing it with the registry within 7 days after their wedding. So that becomes part of the government's records.
So I guess when you're hiking, you need to make sure.
That one was tricky. So I did ask them, are you absolutely sure these people will be there? The lucky thing is they do have a house that's not too far away. So if we really have to, there's also a choice, but we have to go back down.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, it's great to be able to celebrate a wedding in those very amazing places, but it does add a bit of stress for you to everything go according to plan. Wow, it's
true. But so far, it's all good.
Oh, and also one final pop-up question I think of is usually people tend to plan well in advance, especially for auspicious dates, the good dates. So for Amy, what's your calendar looking like? So how far ahead should they book you, or from your own calendar now, like how far ahead should they reserve the time?
Yeah, so for me, I would say the average is about a year before.
Wow.
But sometimes even if, like you said, they have some very special days or auspicious days. I've had people come in 18 months before, as soon as they have booked their venue, they locked it in, and then they approach me to make sure I can be available on that day. There are also people who would approach me, say, 6 months before. But these days with COVID, there's a lot of how to say, like unpredictable things, right? So you have people like they have postponed and they said, oh, my new date might be this day, so I have to block it first, but it may or may not happen. So that happens too. There are also, like I said, people who never planned to get married in Hong Kong, and then suddenly 5 weeks before they decided, oh, I would like to do it. Is there enough time? Can I do it? So in terms of the paperwork, if they approach me at least a month before, we should be able to get it done in time. But like we discussed before, it's always better to plan in advance. And there's also something to note, which is because the government will accept applications at most 3 months before your wedding date.
Oh,
So, but if you do it too early, especially during these times, right? Because there's also validity period. So the approval is only valid for 3 months after the date of the notice. So if you have to postpone, then it's better that you don't file too early. You don't make it too tight, but then I always, look at the schedule and I'll say, I think this would be a good time to file based on your, situation. And then I help them with the documents. But then sometimes if they really have to postpone it, then it's still not the end of the world. You have to pay the filing fee again. It's just a small sum. And I help them with the documents again. So that's just something to note. And going through a celebrant, I guess one of the good things is, you have someone who can plan all these things for you.
Yeah, and having these reminders about dates and validity is very important as well, not to miss any of them. Well, thank you very much, Amy, Kimberly, and Sarah for this very interactive discussion about getting married in these extraordinary times.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you,
you, Amy.
And good luck to everyone who's planning their wedding.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for all the listeners too.
Yeah, so if anyone from the audience would like to connect with any of the speakers here, I've sent out the contact details in the chat box. You can check it out, or our email address. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. And hopefully we'll see you again in our future events. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.